The Beifong family, by the time of the original Avatar series, is by far the richest family in the history of the Four Nations, even surpassing the plundered riches of the Fire Nation royal family. Not only this, but the Beifongs had the distinct honor of training more than one Avatar in their time, and by the time we reached the last generation of their descendants, one person who joined the family attempted to become the dictator of the entire Earth Kingdom. And this was done more brutally than even Ozai. So hit that subscribe button and let's get into the entire family tree of the Beifong family. So to start off, right at the top of the tree we have Lu Beifong and Lady Wu Mei. The Beifong name goes back generations before Toph ever earthbent a single rock. The family called itself the House of the Flying Boar, and for centuries they were one of the wealthiest and best connected noble houses in the entire Earth Kingdom, based out of a wealthy town named Gaoling. The head of the family in the years just before the 100-Year War was a man named Lu Beifong, an Earth sage and a shrewd political operator whose own children and grandchildren left him fairly unimpressed. This was because none of them showed much talent at all for either business or for bending. Now, Lu's wife, Lady Wu Mei, was widely regarded as the sharper mind of the two, and by most accounts, the family leaned on her judgment just as much as his. Now, the person that Lu actually pours his energy into is a young earthbender from a humble background named Jianzhu, whom he takes on as a personal student and treats, by most accounts, more like a son than any of his real own descendants. Under Lu's training, Jianzhu grows into one of the finest earthbenders of his generation, and he eventually becomes the earthbending teacher of Avatar Kuruk himself, placing a man that Lu personally trained at the side of the most powerful figure in the world. That closeness pays off for the family for years, right up until Avatar Kuruk dies unexpectedly and the Earth Kingdom is left scrambling to identify his successor. Lu plays a leading role in that search, and when the process goes badly wrong and the wrong young man is publicly named as the Avatar, the fallout eventually turns Jianzhu against his own mentor and gets Lu killed inside the Fire Nation royal palace by a vengeful young man named Yun, the very person that Lu's family had helped mistake for the Avatar in the first place. It's a strange, almost gothic opening for a family that later produces the most beloved earthbender in the entire franchise, and it tells you something about the Beifongs right from the start. This is a family that survives scandal and loss and somehow keeps producing people who reshape the world around them anyway. And then we have a many generation gap between Lu and the next branch on the tree, which is Lao and Poppy Beifong, who are the parents of Toph Beifong. By the time the war reaches its final stretch, the family has shrunk down to just 3 people. Lao Beifong runs the family's business empire, holding a stake in earth and fire industries, and he's every bit as wealthy and respected as his ancestors were. He marries a woman named Poppy, and together they have a single child, a daughter born blind. Lao and Poppy do love their daughter deeply, but they respond to her blindness with suffocating protection, convinced that she's fragile, helpless, and incapable of surviving on her own. That daughter is of course Toph Beifong, and almost everything about her later life ends up being a reaction against the world that her parents tried to build around her. And that brings us on to the next branch, which is Toph Beifong. Toph discovers earthbending as a small child, learning it in secret from the badger moles living beneath her family's estate, the very creatures who taught earthbending to the humans in the first place. Now, because she can't see, she learns to read the world through vibrations and seismic sense moving through the ground, a sense that is so refined that she eventually surpasses every hired teacher that her parents bring to her to instruct her. And while Lao and Poppy believe they're raising a delicate girl who can barely cross a room unassisted, Toph is secretly sneaking out at night to fight grown men in an underground earthbending arena under the name The Blind Bandit, and she has never lost a single match in that arena. And that is until Aang shows up. Eventually, Aang tracks her down and asks her to teach him earthbending, and she finally has her excuse to walk away from the life that her parents built for her, and she leaves home for good to travel with a group of complete strangers rather than stay another day under her parents' roof. This is of course when she joins Team Avatar. Toph's time with Team Avatar is where she truly comes into her own. She teaches Aang the fundamentals of earthbending, clashes constantly with Katara at the beginning over discipline and manners, and forms one of the closest friendships of her life with Sokka. And that might be very important later. Regardless, her defining invention comes almost by accident, during a stretch where she's captured and locked inside of a solid metal cage by bounty hunters who have been sent by her parents, including people from the arena, and unable to sense much through the reinforced walls, she eventually realizes that metal is never truly pure, that traces of raw earth inside of it are still buried somewhere inside there, and she learns to bend those impurities well enough to tear her own cage apart from within. That breakthrough becomes metal bending, a discipline that nobody in the Earth Kingdom had ever achieved before, and it plays a direct hand in helping end a war that had already lasted 100 years. Toph Beifong goes down in the history books as one of the greatest earthbenders in history for having invented metalbending. Once the war ends, Toph puts her inventions straight to work. She opens up a metalbending academy to train other benders in the discipline that she created, and hoping to spread the art of metalbending to more people in the Earth Kingdom. Later on, she plays a large role in the creation of Republic City alongside Aang and Zuko, and even becomes the first chief of police in the newly founded Republic City, and builds the metalbending police force basically from the ground up from scratch. Her personal life during this stretch is mostly private and unknown, but she raises 2 daughters from 2 different fathers. And if you want to know who the 2 men were or who they could be, check out the video on screen now. And then she parents them according to a philosophy that is a direct answer to her own childhood. Where Lao and Poppy smothered her with restriction, Toph gives her own daughters almost total freedom, refusing to tell either one of them who their father is, although Lin later knows that her father is Kanto, although we don't really know if Kanto is his real name or just a pseudonym, but that is for the video on screen. And eventually, this ends up costing both of her daughters a great deal more than she ever expects, because they turn out very differently. And that leads us on to the elder daughter, Lin Beifong. Lin's mother is of course Toph and her father is Kanto, and she was born in a relationship that in Toph's own later words simply didn't work out. Lin spends her childhood trying to earn her mother's attention by following her straight into police work, eventually rising to become the chief of police herself. And she becomes just as gifted a metalbender as Toph and considerably more rigid about upholding the law. She has a brief relationship with the young airbending master named Tenzin, the son of Aang, before he ultimately chooses to marry someone else, and that disappointment hardens into something within her that never really softens again for years. She eventually becomes one of the victims of Aman's ability to take away someone's bending while trying to defend Tenzin's family, and this does start to soften her up, and thankfully Korra is able to restore her bending via the power of Aang, but this was forever an immensely traumatic experience for Lin because her bending was most of her identity, and it was the thing that really connected her to her mother, because of course they were both metalbenders. And then we get to Suyin Beifong, the younger daughter of Toph. She was born 6 years after her sister, and she takes the opposite path entirely. Where Lin channeled her mother's absence into discipline, Suyin channeled it into rebellion, running with a street gang called the Terror Triad and treating school and the law as an inconvenient suggestion rather than actual obligations. The 2 sisters clashed constantly throughout their teenage years, and one particular confrontation on the streets of Republic City ends in Lin trying to arrest her own sister using a set of metal cables. During this confrontation, Suyin bends the cables straight back at her during the struggle, and this is how Lin obtains the famous scars on her face. Now, Toph is desperate to protect the reputation of the very police force that she runs, so she quietly destroys the official report and sends Suyin away to live with her own parents, Lao and Poppy, rather than let the scandal become public. Lin never fully forgives either of them for the choice, and the rift between the 2 sisters ends up lasting for decades. Suyin leaves her grandparents' household at 16 and spends years traveling the world, following almost exactly in her mother's footsteps by crossing the desert and meeting its sandbenders before finally deciding to settle down somewhere more permanent. She buys a plot of Earth Kingdom land and hires an architect to help her design something that nobody has ever attempted before in the Earth Kingdom or anywhere in the world. A city built almost entirely out of metal called Zaofu. Zaofu becomes a refuge for benders and freethinkers who never quite fit in anywhere else, and Suyin goes on to raise 5 children within its walls, alongside an orphan girl that she takes in and raises as one of her own. And that young orphan girl becomes very, very important in this family tree later on. After that, we have the husband of Suyin, Bata Sr. He's the architect that Suyin hires to help her design Zaofu, and he's a quiet, thoughtful man, and he falls in love with her over the course of the project. The 2 eventually marry and settle down inside of the very city that they built together, and Bata continues working on the city's architecture for years afterwards. And that leads us to the first son of Suyin, Bata Jr. He is also an engineer who inherits his father's gift for building and design, and eventually takes a leading role in running the city's infrastructure for himself. He's the one member of the next generation who most resembles his father, sharing his talent for architecture and his quiet, methodical mind. And that resemblance really hurts because later he eventually betrays his father to help someone else in this family tree. But for now, we move to the second son of Suyin, Huan. and he grows up drawn far more to art than architecture, spending his days shaping strange metal sculptures inspired by spiritual events rather than following the practical family business of architecture and engineering. He's the artist of the group, a little detached and easily annoyed when people misread his work, but when it matters most, he stands firmly on the right side of his family. And that leads us to Opal. Suyin and Bata's daughter Opal turns out to be the one who breaks the family mold completely. After a rare cosmic event realigns the spiritual energy of the entire world, airbending abilities start appearing at random in people with no connection to the former air nomads at all. And it's Korra and Team Avatar who first travel to Zaofu, chasing a rumor of a new airbender living inside the city. That airbender turns out to be Opal, and once she discovers her gift, she eventually leaves Zaofu behind to train under Tenzin with the reborn Air Nation, where she later joins a relationship with Bolin, one of Team Avatar's own. So not only have the Beifongs trained 2 avatars in their history, they now can claim that they were part of the restoration of the Air Nomad Nation, and would be so proud that one of Toph's family members was one of the members of the restored Air Nation. And that leads us to the 2 oddballs, Wei and Wing. These are the 2 youngest children, they're twin brothers, and they grow up serving in Zaofu's security force. They're rarely taken quite as seriously as their older siblings, and they're known mostly for finishing each other's sentences and getting distracted by pretty faces at exactly the wrong moment. Though, when their mother and brothers are taken captive later on, they're every bit as willing to fight for the family as anyone else. So who were they fighting against? Why were their family members going to prison? Well, that all comes from the girl that Suyin took in as her own, the orphan named Kuvira. Ever since coming in as an orphan, she is treated as a genuine member of the Beifong family. She's personally mentored by Suyin and trained into one of the single most gifted metalbenders in the city and that the city has ever produced. When the Earth Kingdom collapses into chaos after the Earth Queen is overthrown and killed by Zahir when he pulled the oxygen out of her lungs, Kuvira sees an opportunity to restore order through force, styling herself as the Great Uniter and marching from province to province, bringing every scattered territory back under one single banner. Suyin refuses to let Zaofu join Kuvira's new campaign, and the relationship between the mentor and the protege turns openly hostile when Kuvira convinces Bata Jr., by now her fiancé, to turn against his own family and help seize control of the city itself. Bata Sr. and Huan are imprisoned for refusing to bow to Kuvira, and Suyin and her twin sons are taken captive. And for a while, it genuinely looks as though Kuvira might succeed in tearing the entire family apart using the very training that Suyin once gave her out of love. It eventually takes Korra herself, backed by a spirit vine-powered weapon large enough to level a city block, to finally bring Kuvira's campaign to an end. And then, this whole Kuvira crisis trying to take over the Earth Kingdom again and put it under one dictator, kinda like Chin the Conqueror, is what ultimately brings the rest of the family back together. But it isn't quite the end of Kuvira's story. A few years later, one of her former lieutenants, a man named Guan, tries to revive the Earth Empire in her absence, brainwashing citizens across the Earth Kingdom into backing his own campaign for power. Kuvira, who's still living under guard following her defeat to Korra, ends up working alongside Korra and her former fiancé, Bata Jr., to help stop him, risking damage to her own mind to help build a device that is capable of reversing Guan's brainwashing on their captured friends, and she's really shown that she has repented for her actions. And that final act of loyalty is what tips the scales for her long-delayed trial. She initially refuses to plead guilty, insisting that the order and modernization that she brought to the Earth Kingdom outweighed all of the harm that she caused, but her role in stopping Guan, combined with a genuine show of remorse, is enough to convince Suyin to personally vouch for her before the tribunal. Kuvira is ultimately released into Suyin's custody and sentenced to house arrest back in Zaofu, the very city that she once tried to conquer, and the two embrace outside of the courtroom once the verdict comes down. Opal, speaking for the rest of the family, tells Kuvira that she was never technically born a Beifong, but she's always going to be one anyway. Toph, who had long since stepped away from public life and retreated into the foggy swamp to live as something close to a hermit, then comes out of isolation the moment she learns through the swamp's vines that Suyin's family has been captured. She reconciles with Suyin first, and later, once Kuvira's crisis is finally resolved, she reconciles with Lin as well, closing a rift that had lasted more than 2 decades. Lin and Suyin make their own peace in front of a statue of their mother, finally letting go of a grudge that began with a childhood fight that neither of them ever truly wanted in the first place. What began with a politician murdered in a palace over a lie about the Avatar somehow ends with 3 generations of the same family standing together after everything they've survived. This is the full and complete family tree of the Beifong family, one of the richest and most influential families in the entire history of the 4 nations. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to see another family tree, check out the Zuko family tree of the Fire Nation royal family on screen now, and check out heaps more lore just like this on the channel. Thanks so much for watching. If you made it this this far, drop a thank Mr. Zuko in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next one.